Okay, so far so good. That'll do for that. That all works smoothly. I'm just going to check the action of the retard gear train. I'll hold back the pallets, move that to its maximum extent, release the pallets back again. And if we just lift the pallets slightly, you'll hear that speed train run down. Yeah. Yep, that runs nicely. So that's good. We'll pop that to one side. So we've got our diaphragm assembled, our mechanism plates assembled. We can look at these shutter blades, see what sort of a state they're in. What I'm checking for here is to see how stained or marked they are. If there was any obvious corrosion on them, they'd need to be polished. Now there's a few marks there I can see against the light. You probably can't see that. And I'm just going to try cleaning one with some Ronsonol now and see if the marks that I'm seeing disappear. If they do, this will be all that's required. If they don't, these are going to have to be polished with a bit of Brasso. I don't like using Brasso because once you finish using it, you've got to do an extra good job of cleaning up afterwards. Otherwise, you'll be leaving abrasive particles in your shutter. And now that looks good. And also I believe that Brasso very likely contains some sort of waxy substance in there to stop brass or copper from tarnishing so quickly afterwards. And if that's the case, you'd certainly want that waxy rubbish off your blades too. Now that's good. I'm pleased with it. There's a little mark there. Let's see if that'll clean off. Now that's there to stay. It's only very small. Right. More Ronsonol and do the next blade. That looks good. Blades inside a leaf blade shutter like this generally get contaminated with oil, and which is settled on the surfaces. It's probably evaporated from elsewhere in the mechanism. Now, one of the things that it does, of course, is that the contamination with the oil tends to stick the blades together and cause you grief. But it probably protects the shutter blades from corrosion to a certain extent too. So if you do get corrosion on a shutter blades on a sealed shutter, I mean by sealed I mean one that's got a lens group front and rear, then it probably means that the camera has been exposed to moisture at some stage, serious moisture. Left out in the rain, something of that nature, even gone for a swim. If you get a camera where the shutter blades are not protected by lenses at all times, I'm thinking of something like a Retina Reflex S or a Voigtlander Prominent or something like that. When there's no lens on the camera, the blades are completely open to the atmosphere and they are prone to corrosion. Right, well, I'm pleased with the condition of those blades. That all looks good to me. So now we can fit the blades. So first I'll unhook that spring, swing that arm out, which moves my blade actuating ring round to the open position where the blades will be open. This is our first blade. It's got two holes. or 3 holes with the big one in the middle. That's our first blade, and that fits here. I'm not sure if it's on these shutters or not, but I know that some shutters, if you go around in the wrong direction, you can actually end up with a shutter that where the blades are open in the rest position, and they just close briefly when you fire it and then open again. But I'm not in the habit of misassembling these, so I can't remember whether it's one of these shutters I'm thinking of or another one. Well, those blades are all in position, and the case can go over those. Now the location of this, you've got 3 screws here. 2 of them are much closer together, so it's easy to figure out which is where it fits. And you've also got the square cutout where the flash sink goes, and that obviously fits over the square cutout in the mechanism plate there. So I'll lower this into position without disturbing those blades. And there are 3 screws to hold that case in place. Sometimes this doesn't drop on neatly, so it's a bit of a neat fit. In a worst case scenario there, that you'll find that the shutter doesn't completely close, and well, what happens is as soon as you tip it over, the blades fall out of position, and then you've got to go back and put them in place again. It's running in funny there, so something's not lined up. That screw doesn't want to go in straight. There's something odd there. Oh, that's... So the casing was not down over the mechanism plate properly, so it was going in a bit skew. Now I'm just doing those screws up very lightly because I suspect the blades may have been disturbed. No, if I swing them in, they drop into place correctly, so that's okay. I'll put that spring back over there. That's ready. Now I've got a 3rd screw there that I haven't put in yet, and I can see that one of the others is relatively loose, so let's get that screw in. Do that up tight. Check the action of the shutter again, give that a flick. It's all good. The flash sink. That contact goes on there. That's the earth basically, or ground connection. You be very gentle with this when you put it into place. It as I mentioned, it's some sort of styrene-y sort of plastic, and it's very fragile and unobtainable. It must be out of the shutter and well away before you start splashing any solvents about, otherwise it has a tendency to go into a gooey mess, and you're not going to have a flash after that. Alright, so I'll do that up. You don't have to go mad doing that screw up, it's only going through the plastic, and it will happily split it if you overdo it. Right, so far so good. Now we've got to clean and assemble the rest of the shutter components. Right, now to clean up the remainder of these parts and then assemble the rest of the shutter. So I'll just clean the pieces one at a time. The familiar technique, cotton bud, bit of Ronsonol, just making sure that any old oil and dust and dirt is removed. This is the cover plate for the flash sync mechanism. Try not to lose this spring, which is sitting around that post. You can do without losing it. As I clean these, I'll just pop them in that other container. Here's the little green lever. It switches from M to X for the flash sync. Here's the B lever, which falls into the mechanism to hold the shutter open when the shutter is set to B, as long as you've got your finger on the release. Flip that thing over. That's better. These parts are usually fairly clean. They're usually not covered in oil or anything, so this is just they don't require a great deal of effort to get them clean enough to do the job. Whenever you're wiping around a gear like that with nice sharp teeth, make sure you haven't left any threads of your cotton bud behind on it. Otherwise things will get jammed up when they're going to run, and it's annoying. That's the pallet. That rattles backwards and forwards as it runs on the pallet wheel. And that provides a little bit of delay for the flash. There's our spring for our 1/500th speed. And we'll be lubricating that before it goes back. Here's our flash contact and the lever. Now they don't need to be touched at all, they're quite good. And this piece here, we don't have to disturb that. That's quite clean, that's ready to go. So some assembly next, I think. Just checking that everything seems to be about. We'll start with our shutter again. And let's start. We'll start with the pallet. Now the pallet has got a slightly rounded edges on the top surface. The bottom surface is just dead flat, quite sharp edges. Rounded surface wants to be at the top. That's so that it doesn't catch on the stuff above it. It's on a little post which raises it above the height of the bed, so it's not going to catch on the base. So that part's good. We can drop this little wheel on there. I might lubricate that now, make it easier. What I'm interested in it's got like a little cam on there. Now the lobe of that cam, the top of the camshaft so to speak, that's just want to run a little bit of molybdenum across there, and honestly you need very little. If it looks like a black blob, you've certainly got far too much. Just needs a smear. Alright. I'm going to lubricate in the shaft and just the inside of that spring, and it doesn't need much. Again, it's just a smear. That sits in there like that. Yeah, flash contact. This is two pieces. I'll separate it so you can see what they look like. The contact goes through there. If I can do this without getting my dirty fingers all over it. Contact goes through that end of the arm, and the plate on the contact goes underneath. It sits like that. It sits in this position. The flash contact is on this side of that pin there. There's a pin that it sits on top of, a location pin. That's good. Countersunk head screw, it's the longer one. If you've got 2 screws left, you might end up with a little short bugger like that. That's for the outside case. It's the longest screw that you want here. Just making sure that's sitting down correctly. That's good. That the spring here is swinging correctly in the right spot there. And at this cam, if I revolve it with the tip of my tweezers, you can see as it pushes that arm backwards and forwards and makes and breaks the flash contact at that point. So I'll set that with the cam over in this direction. This component, I'm putting a little touch of lubricant on here. This is where it latches into place and holds the shutter, stops it from releasing. I'll swing this little tab back out of the way so that post is not blocking it. It drops down over that post and meshes with the teeth on that wheel. Now I'm checking the alignment, and in this position where you can just swing this lever across and put it in the lock position, this arm should be free against the flat side of the cam, and it is. That's the correct position. Now the exciting part. Where's my spring? There it is. Now we've got to get the spring in place. If you look closely, I've swung this lever back against the case so it is blocking this arm from swinging in. That's where it needs to sit. That's the cocked position. Now we've got to get this spring in place. So I catch this, and the loop in the end of the spring is right on the tip of these nice strong tweezers. The spring goes, the hook on the spring drops into this tiny hole on the arm right there, and I have to stretch it out and drop it over this post. There are 2 posts there. It's the one closest to the outside of the case. That's sitting there, that's all good. Just checking that nothing's disturbed. That looks fine. Now the cover goes on. Before I put the cover on, I'm going to check to make sure that the arm on the cover, which forms part of the release mechanism, is free to move. This arm here. It looks pretty good. Just checking that that's not rubbing on anything. No, that's good. There were 2 spaces, 2 brass spaces. They go here and here. There's 2 holes there. One of them is screw drilled. That's a screw from the other side. It's this end one that we're interested in this position here. So the spaces go on, and they're just standoffs. They're just to keep this top plate correctly positioned. So now we've got to drop this in. It sits over the top of the post there. There's a post right at this point, and that sits on there, and that's dropped in too. Now I've just got my spring here. You can see my spring's on the wrong side. The spring's on the wrong side. I want that on this side of the post, so I'm just going to lift that, swing that spring around, drop it back down. That's better. Alright, so my spacers are here and here, and they're correctly positioned. There are two screws here. One's a large head, a plain screw, nothing exciting about that. The other one is for the green lever. That's got a shoulder on it. That goes there. It looks like a thinner head. Alright, so the plain screw goes at this end, and I'll run that down. Run it all the way, but I haven't done it up tight yet. Our lever slides in underneath the spring. And we'll drop its screw into place. Get that started. Now the spring has to come back around that rivet there on that lever. So I'm swing it across with my tweezers, and you can see how it clicks into place. It's a bistable, I suppose you'd say, and it serves to disengage this lever from the cam, and that's what changes it from M and X sync. Okay, so that's all good. Do up those two screws. We want the B lever next. Here's our B lever. And its spring. Its spring has this, its screw has this spring on it. So I normally just get that screw started. Get my spring positioned. The long arm I pull back against the side of the case. Now the short arm of the spring has got a bit of a hook on the end of it. It has to drop down behind. That's just moved on me. The short end goes around this lever right there, and that spring has just popped out of position, I think, so I'm just going to see if I can wriggle it back into position. There's a groove around the top of that screw that spring should sit into. It should not be trapped underneath this screw. Let's see how we go. Pop that spring back against the edge of the case. That's moving very freely. Let's do that screw up. Check again. Yes, that's all good. Snug that screw up. The spring at this side, at the moment it's against the case. I need to move it so it's on the inside of this lever here. So you've got to get hold of that with your finest tweezers. Lift it up and drop it over. There's a little groove on the inside of that lever. That's it. If we press this, it releases the tension on that whole flash sync mechanism, and this lever here, if we move that, it will cock it. Now that's what happens when you cock the shutter, and it arms this flash sink part, and if we press this, that's what the release does, it releases it. That is ready for this piece, and this piece is what actually drives the shutter. This coil spring is the main spring for the shutter. The tension on that is what opens and closes your shutter blades. Right, so we'll pop this to one side, clean this up, clean up our shutter release, lubricate them and pop them into place. So what I'm doing here is just making sure that any old grease and dirt is off, so we can replace it with fresh grease without dirt. It contacts the shutter in various places. Let's get this little bit of lubricant on my toothpick. This piece is called the bird or the bird beak pawl. Now that's job is to actually opens the shutter blades. It pushes on this piece, flips the blades open. The peg on the bottom of it tracks inside this groove here so that it goes in the correct direction one way and returns the other. On the outside, this point, where are we? Here. This point here is where the thing catches. That's the latch that holds the shutter cocked, ready to be released. This point here contacts the spring that sets the 500th of a second going. This point contacts our retard gear train, and that's what drives that. Make sure that that works correctly. So I'm just running a bit of lubricant, and it's just a tiny smear as ever with this stuff around the inside, just so this piece will revolve neatly. Right, so I make sure that the flash sink is armed. Flip the B lever back out of the way so that it's clear of my spring. Drop that down into position. Swing back that lever. Hold that with my finger. Swing back the other piece. Pull the B lever back out of the way where it's busy blocking stuff. I'm checking the position of my 500th spring, and it is around there. That's good, that's the right side. Hold that back, pull this tab out of the way, make sure that that bird beak is dropped into place. That's all good. Now the spring. Get into that with my tweezers, pull it over to that post, drop it over the post. Just checking that it does move. Nothing's trapped where it shouldn't be. That all looks good. One more spring to pull into place. There's a very fine spring. Remember that one. That drops in here, and that pulls this arm into place. That is ready to go. So our shutter release lever, I'm just going to put a touch of molybdenum on the pivot. Now I saw a bit of fluff stuck to that, so I'm just checking that closely to make sure. There's a little bit of cotton rubbish on there that had caught on the rivet when I'd cleaned it. That's gone. This sits over, there's a post right here near that green lever. The pivot is right here. This little tab of a spring pops down the side of the case by that green lever. It's on the inside of the case, that's where it has to be. I'm just checking that this is falling into place. It has, and it releases. That all looks good. Check that the actuating ring is, the cocking ring is all in place. That's good. I'm going to clean this plate up. This is our speed control ring. Get rid of all the dust off that. This shutter is comparatively clean as shutters go. I know it had been abused, but it's quite clean inside. It's not uncommon to find shutters very dirty and very oily. This one has probably been serviced quite possibly more than once in its life. Alright, let's run a little bit of molybdenum around the inside so that this will rotate on the case fairly easily. And I'll run some around. This is where the retard gear train runs, so I'm running it on the points of that cam. And our high speed, our 500th of a second spring is cocked at this point. As you revolve that speed control ring to the 500 position, it compresses the spring at this point, sets it. There's a bit of dust in there, I'll just blow that out, it's better. Let's get this in place. Alright, so normally I'll set it on. I've set it up, you can see this point on the retard gear train. This is the 10th of a second position there. That's set it about there, that's about right, it's not trapped. This B lever is trapped underneath at the moment. I've got to fish that out, that's better. So it's running on this cam surface here. Okay, so I'll swing it as far as it goes this way, that's the B position. With a bit of luck, if I cock it, it stays cocked. And when I hit release, it stays open until I let my finger off it, in which case it snaps shut again. If I move the speed control ring round until the pin is just on this point here, that should give us a 10th of a second, and let's see what it's like. That's pretty good. That sounds good to me. I can test that later, but that sounds adequate to me. So I'm going to clean this plate. The shutter is ready to close up. I'm going to look closely at this, make sure it's not distorted in any way, because I already know that other parts have been distorted and that there's nothing on there that's untoward. That all looks good. Okay, so that's wrong. Get it in the right position. There are three large cutouts here, here and here. They align with this, this and this tab. There's a fourth cutout, a small one, that's there. That aligns with this thing. So basically the tabs drop into the large cutouts. You revolve this cover plate clockwise slightly to align this piece with the notch in the case. Get your very special screwdriver, rotate that into position. That's now all locked together, can't fall apart. We try it on a 1 second setting and see what it sounds like. That sounds pretty good. What else have we got left? Oh, here we go. So the case, the outer case needs to be cleaned. What I'm mostly interested in here is any grease or dirt that's in that track where the curved rack runs, and I'm checking the rest of it to make sure that it's not distorted or out of shape. I'm already a bit suspicious about this one because I know what terrible things have been done. I think that's doable. The curved rack, I'm making sure that's clean. Again, I'm getting rid of any old grease and dirt. This is our click stop piece for the aperture, so I'm giving that a wipe. Right, a bit of lubricant here, just a bit of molybdenum on the back surface and on the sides. That's it. That's still recording, is it? That's all good. Okay, so our flash sink, we've got to get our flash sink back in place. Here's our wire. Now there's where it goes into the flash sink at the back of the case. So hold that in with one finger. Now, that tiny piece of plastic, that tiny insulating slug, that has to drop down that hole. This absolutely enormous grub screw pops on top, and we'll run that down. Right, well that camera stopped recording there. I'd run to my limit, so let's go back to where we were. Do that screw up, that tightens up our flash sink. Next thing to drop into place is our curved rack. To make that easier, first I'm going to cock the shutter by moving the cocking lever across. That takes it to the end of its range. Just makes it easier to get this thing dropped in. I've cleaned that rack, wiped a little bit of molybdenum on there to make sure that it runs freely. It drops into the track in that case. And then the case should drop back over the shutter, all going well, and it does. Rotate it into position and line my holes up. 2 holes. This one in the middle, there's 3 holes but only 2 of them do anything. This one in the middle, that takes that screw with the integral washer. That screw serves as a locator. That actually stops the shutter rotating in the mount. Let's get that thing lined up. It's not wanting to go. So it's quite important that that screw is present, otherwise when you went to cock the shutter would want to start turning back the other way, and before you know it everything would jam up and turn to custard. This is the last of the screws. That's that little countersunk head screw, very shallow. That drops in there. I just check that flash sink wire is tucked down neatly, back out of the way, that's good. This piece here, this piece does the click stops for our diaphragm setting, our aperture settings. It's not symmetrical. The positions are very close together at one end and further apart at the other. The ones where they're further apart, in fact there's a big gap at that end, that's at the maximum aperture end of the scale, the one closest to the flash sink post. You'll know if you get this wrong because they won't line up with the numbers. So I've tucked it into the case at this point. Now we're going to tuck it into the case at the other end. That's it. That should just click stop. It's just a light click stop. That's all that's wanted. Seems to be good. I've got to find a pointer for this, of course. That part was missing. that is it for the shutter. This disc is distorted, and I'm not even sure how someone achieved that, but then people can do wondrous things. As I say, that thing's just a space filler, really, a trim. It does not serve any function in positioning the lens relative to the body. That's served by the shutter itself there against the lens. That would drop into place in that position. The lenses I've got to clean, and then they can be screwed into place. And I'll find that pointer that I've got to replace there. But by and large, that's the shutter done. That's ready to go on the camera. Thank you.